outhouse. It's like an essential thing to do if you're going to live off-grid in Alaska, because that's how most people start with their, where you put your poop. Because that's a problem to solve. You got to put it somewhere. I did in my book, I did note that we did have a neighbor that used to just put it in plastic bags and take it to the dump. I don't recommend that, although it's great deterrent for identity thieves that are trying to dig through the dumpster and find some useful info. But anyways, you got to start by digging a hole. Dig a hole big enough for a 55-gallon drum. You may or may not put the drum in there. We choose to do that. If you are going to put a 55-gallon drum in your outhouse hole, make sure you put holes in the bottom of it so things can drain through. You don't want it to just kind of sit there, because it'll fill up very, very quickly if you do it that way. Anyway, so around your hole, you're going to need to kind of have some skids, some kind of thing to put your floor joists on. So I had some leftover treated 4x4s from a different thing that I had done, and so I'm using as much recycled leftover stuff as possible. It's just the way I like to do things. So I kind of put my skids around the hole. It's going to be a 3 foot by 4 foot footprint, roughly. You want to maybe pack dirt under the skids in different ways to make sure they're pretty much level. Not that it necessarily is super essential to have a level outhouse, but it will definitely help make sure that the structure on top of it is square and everything. Square, plumb, level, all that good stuff. So after that, you got to put your floor joists across from one skid to the next. I'm using 2x6s for this. Since it's such a small building, you could probably get by with 2x4s. But I don't want the floor to kind of sag in the middle in case we have a very large guest that's going to be using it or whatever. I want it to be a nice and solid floor. So I'm using 2x6s, go across, make sure that you've got big space between the back ones so that there's a place for everything to fall through. Right? It needs to kind of go around the outer edges of that barrel. So that's why we're doing 2 foot centers. That allows us to have a space around the barrel. And then the area in front where you're going to be sitting, standing, putting your feet, I put a little extra support in the middle of that just so the floor doesn't sink at all. I want it to be, solid. So after putting floor joists, then you want to put some floor in the first part. So I just used a leftover piece of 3/4 inch plywood. 3/4 inch is kind of minimum for flooring. So I put that, but then you have this kind of just these bare floor joists around the back. And since I'm going to have like a foot plate or a bottom plate for my walls, I needed to have them sit on something level. So I put kind of scraps around the edge so that the walls would sit level. So then you make walls. The walls are just going to be 2x4. The shorter or the lower down one, because that's going to be just a single pitch roof, the lower down one's going to be about 6 feet. Studs are going to be 6 feet, and I'm going to use this extra 2 foot section for spacers between the rafters. Now this is going to be the foot plate, or the bottom plate, for the 4 foot wall. So I'm going to mark here at 2 feet. All right, that's my center point for the next stud. But something else that I like to do is, knowing that studs are about 1.5 inches wide, I always mark 3/4 inch on either side in situations like this. So then I can just kind of make a little line across. And that tells me very much where to put the stud. When you're making your wall, you've got your vertical studs, and you've got your bottom plate, and you've got your top plate. Before you start to put anything on there or put it on the outhouse, you want to make sure that it's square, and the way to do that is to measure from corner to corner. Now, from one corner to the other corner should be the same as the other 2 corners. If they're not the same measurement, then you don't have a perfect square. So that's your Pythagorean theorem in action, of just triangles and squares and hypotenuses and hypotenusae, whatever the plural of hypotenuse is. I don't know how often people have to say the plural of hypotenuse. Whatever. Okay, so you've got once you know your wall is perfect rectangle. I like to kind of put sheathing on it ahead of time if I can, but the shorter wall, I'm just going to be using scraps on it. So I'm going to go ahead and put a scrap on there that will, once I screw it down, it will keep that wall square. And then I'm going to go ahead and put that on the outhouse floor. I'm going to tack it down, and then I'm going to brace it. And you brace it, what you do is once you've tacked it down, you put a level. Well, you put the brace partially in place, and then you get your level and you hold it vertical against your studs. And you adjust, and once those studs are vertical, that's when you screw the brace in place so that that keeps that wall vertical while you're doing the rest of stuff. Bracing, if you're doing work on your own, if you're building by yourself, I do all kinds of stuff for bracing. I mean, it's like having somebody else there to hold something in place. So do lots of bracing. I like to use just 1x stuff because it's quick and easy. It generally holds its rigidity, and I can just put screws in very easily. Second wall, a little bit taller than the first because I've got to have some slope on the roof pitch there. Doesn't need much. It's okay for high snow loads to sit on a roof patch that's just this small, 3 foot by 4 foot, not a big deal. And again, I wanted the leftover scraps to be able to be spacers between the rafters. So this wall, because I did go to the store yesterday and buy a full sheet of plywood, I'm putting that full sheet of plywood on this wall. The rest of the sheathing is going to be scraps. So second wall up, also brace that. So now there's 2 walls. After you brace them, that's when you start to do your rafters, because the rafters themselves will hold them in place, and they are kind of yet another kind of bracing. So you do your rafters. Again, I'm using just 2x4s. You want to have a little bit of overhang so that you're not dripping water down, like it doesn't have a way to get like into the building after it's dripping down. You want to make sure that you put 2x4s between the rafters. Those will keep birds from coming in and building nests in there. You also want to try to keep bugs out, things like that. So you want to make sure that those are pretty solid there. And then after that, you're going to need to run some strips of 1x material the other way across your rafters. You could just do a piece of plywood on the top and then just do metal roofing. I bought some semi-translucent like greenhouse roofing. They didn't have the clear stuff when I went to the store yesterday, so I had to buy some like translucent gray stuff because I wanted that on the ceiling or the roof to let light through, because if you're doing your business, you want to make sure that when you think you're done wiping, that you actually are done. You don't want to make that mistake. So I want to make sure that there's good lighting in there. And when you're doing this kind of roof, you don't want a piece of plywood underneath it, because then that just negates the whole purpose of having lighting. So you need to have those strips going across as something to screw your plastic roofing onto. And you're going to want to use roofing screws still. So once you do your pieces across, then you're going to want to run some also down the rafters themselves so that it's all flush. So you do that.
I just used tin snips to cut this roofing. I've already made a start of a cut on either side at 4 feet. So that should get us through. Just use regular roofing screws, roofing screw bit. It'll work.
You screw your roofing in place, and then you've got most of an outhouse. You still got to do the back wall, sheathe that in, and then you've got a 3-sided building. Okay, now we have to build the throne. For the seat, you're going to want it well supported. You're going to want to make sure that it's a solid place where you could sit in case you got to sit for a long time. So I'm going to have 2 supports in the front and 2 supports in the back. And from these 2 supports, I'm going to have 2x4s going across the whole thing and pinned into the wall studs. so that your weight is going to be sitting on those supports, but that the cross piece is also securely into those wall studs. Now, apart from that, you're going to want to have basically two rails going from those front supports to those back supports. So this will give you a rough outline of what the toilet seat is going to be sitting on top of. So make sure all your 2x4s are securely attached together. They are securely joined, if you want to say joined. After that, I wanted to make sure that if you have somebody in there that's kind of just out of control, that it doesn't spray everything all over the site. So I wanted to get kind of some scrap 2x4 to go along those guide rails to kind of focus the area that the stuff's going to go. So I added that, and then you want to put plywood on the front. And then comes the top piece, right? You want to have a piece of plywood that fits nice and flush in its space, but you also want to make sure that the circle or oval cut into it fits your toilet seat nicely, perfectly, right? Because again, you don't want stuff getting out. You want to make sure it all goes where it's meant to go. So you'll notice I kind of put my supports kind of low. I didn't want it to be too tall of a throne. Couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, science has shown that the closer you are to a squatting position, the better it's going to function. Second of all, you never know when you're going to be visited by children or hobbits or anybody that maybe can't get up to a very, very tall seat. So I wanted to kind of compromise there in the middle. And so you get your circle cut out. You could use a jigsaw, you could use a sawzall, anything that can make a cut that you don't have to cut in from the edge. If you have to cut in from the edge, that's also okay. You'll just want to make sure you kind of put that piece back on and have something to pin it to. It's easier to install if you have your piece of plywood for the top, it's easier to install the toilet seat first and then screw it down, and then instead of putting the plywood in, then having to kind of go up under there to screw the toilet seat in. So try to put the toilet seat on first, and then put your last piece of plywood on. So now you've got 3 walls, you've got your throne, all you need left is the door. You can make the door out of it. You can buy a door. I mean, traditionally it's made by just kind of wooden planks, right, running vertical, and then you've got cross pieces, and then you've got the diagonal cross piece to make sure it doesn't flex one way or the other. So again, I'm going to use scrap for anything and everything I can. Some of it will be board, some of it will be plywood or OSB. I don't really care. And then eventually you're going to want to carve something in the door, but put it up on hinges, put something to close it and keep it closed, just in case you have a bear visitor. So you've hung your door. Your door has a little thing, so you can peek out. You've got light coming through the roof. You've got your throne. Then you just want to spruce it up. You want to make it nice on the inside, nice on the outside. You want to make it as pleasant of a place to be as it can be, because why not? So paint it. You especially want to probably use darker colors of paint, because if you use white paint, you're going to start seeing like stains on the walls that are going to be like, oh, is that just from, anyway. So yeah, make it nice, make it inviting. Put some flowers in there. I don't know. You also want to have a bucket in there with lime or sawdust or something to toss along on the top. You want to have a place for your roll of toilet paper. You want to have add a magazine rack. I don't know. Do whatever you want, but make it a nice place to spend some time in case you got to spend some time. Because as I've noted in my book, you've heard many stories where people get trapped in their outhouse because there's a bear lurking around, or because there's an angry moose out there, and you don't want to be trapped in there without a magazine, and you don't want anyway. I'm not going to go there, but that's the whole process. Good luck on making yours. It doesn't obviously have to be this way. Like I said, I'm making mine with as much scrap as possible. You'll notice I'm using exclusively 12-volt tools so that I can easily work in the field without having to run a generator. I mean, I describe all this stuff in my book, so if you haven't checked it out, Practical Guide for Off-Grid Practical Guide to Off-Grid Living in Alaska. Link is below the video. And good luck with your adventure.
It's really a nice, peaceful place to sit and get some thinking done. You can hear the rain on the roof there. Alright, mission accomplished.
So, not much better after a day of building than some moose burgers cooked on a campfire. I'm lucky.